Imagine pouring your heart and soul into building something, a place meant to be safe, fair, and welcoming for everyone. You build it on trust, on integrity, and then you start hearing whispers, not outright shouts, but faint murmurs, stories that prick at your conscience, suggesting that your dream isn't quite what it seems. That's exactly what happened to Sarah Jenkins, the visionary founder of Sterling Savings. Sarah's journey into finance wasn't paved with silver spoons. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Liberty City, she'd seen firsthand how intimidating and even predatory some financial institutions could be, especially for those who weren't born into wealth or privilege. That experience fueled a fire within her. She wouldn't just open a bank, she'd create a sanctuary. Sterling Savings wasn't just about profits. It was about people. It was a place where everyone, regardless of their background, their attire, or the size of their balance, deserved respect, clarity, and fair treatment. This core belief, this unwavering commitment to accessibility and fairness, was the bedrock upon which she built her empire from the ground up. For years, Sarah poured her life into ensuring that Sterling Savings lived up to its promise. She meticulously crafted policies on fair treatment, anti-discrimination, and customer service excellence. She celebrated every new branch opening, shaking hands with managers, posing for pitches, and delivering passionate speeches about how trust was the true foundation of good banking. Her bank was her legacy, a testament to her belief that finance could be a force for good in the world. But then the murmurs began. At first, they were just that faint, easy to brush aside. A casual comment from a friend about their elderly aunt being treated dismissively at the Grandview branch. A location Sarah had personally greenlit just 3 years prior. A community leader shared a subtle complaint about a younger client dressed in jeans and a hoodie being scrutinized more intensely for a simple transaction compared to someone in a business suit. Nothing blatant enough to make headlines, nothing that screamed discrimination, just a feeling, stories from friends, comments in passing from people she trusted. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, initially relied on her meticulously crafted policies. We have strict guidelines, she'd tell herself. It must be a misunderstanding. But the more she reflected on it, the more it gnawed at her. Policies, she realized, were just words on a page. Real change came from actions, and Sarah needed proof. She needed to know, not as a CEO making an executive decision, but as a human being, as a customer. The idea had been sitting in the back of her mind for months, a quiet thought at first, easy to push aside, but the accumulation of these seemingly small incidents, these subtle betrayals of her founding principles, solidified a burning question that kept her up at night. Was her bank truly different? Was it really accessible? Built on fairness? A pivotal moment, a final straw, came during a community outreach event. A young woman tearfully shared her story of being denied a small business loan at a major bank, not because of her business plan, but because of assumptions about her background and appearance. The raw vulnerability in her eyes, the echo of injustice resonated deeply with Sarah. It was a stark reminder that even with the best intentions and policies, human bias could seep into the crack. It was in that instant, listening to someone else's quiet pain, that Sarah knew she couldn't just manage Sterling Savings from a glass office overlooking the skyline. She had to experience it. She had to put herself in the shoes of those vulnerable customers, the ones who might be dismissed, judged, or denied. So the decision was made. Today, she wouldn't be Miss Jenkins, the powerful CEO. She would just be another woman walking into a bank. No expensive blazer, no silk blouse, no designer heels, just a simple cardigan, jeans, and sneakers. She pulled into the parking lot of the Sterling Savings branch in Grandview. She had shaken hands with the branch manager, Mr. Harrison, at the ribbon cutting, posed for pictures, and given a speech about trust being the foundation of good banking. Now she was walking in as a nobody. The automatic doors slid open, and the crisp scent of freshly printed paper and industrial-strength air freshener filled the lobby. She glanced around. It was a slow afternoon. A few customers stood in line, a couple sat in the waiting area, and a teller at the far end was balancing a cash drawer. Sarah adjusted her bag on her shoulder and stepped up to the counter, ready to see if the whispers were truly the sound of a broken promise. As the automatic doors of the Sterling Savings Grandview branch slid open, Sarah took a deep breath, the crisp scent of freshly printed paper and industrial-strength air freshener filling the lobby. This wasn't the usual sterile, imposing atmosphere of a big bank. She had designed Sterling Savings to feel different, more welcoming, more human. Yet today, the familiar comfort of her own creation felt strangely alien, almost threatening. Every detail, from the subtly patterned carpet to the soft lighting, was a product of her vision. But now it was a stage for an experiment, a place where her own policies would be put to the ultimate, unvarnished test. Her disguise was simple, deliberately unremarkable. Gone were the tailored power suits, the elegant silk blouses, the designer heels that usually announced her presence in any room. Today, she wore a charcoal gray cardigan, a plain white tee, worn but comfortable jeans, and practical lace-up sneakers. Her hair, usually styled in a sleek bob, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No expensive jewelry, no visible markers of wealth. She was just another face in the crowd, blending in with the diverse tapestry of customers she hoped Sterling Savings truly served. Her only accessory was a plain crossbody bag, concealing her phone, a quiet witness to what might unfold. Internally, Sarah was a whirlwind of anticipation and a faint, unsettling anxiety. She wasn't afraid, not exactly, but there was a knot of dread in her stomach. What if the whispers were true? What if the institution she had poured her life into building was subtly failing the very people it was meant to empower? The thought was a bitter pill, but she pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. Today, she wasn't a CEO. She was a single data point in a critical, real-world audit. She glanced around. It was a slow afternoon, typical for a Tuesday. A few customers stood patiently in line at the far end, their faces showing the quiet resignation of everyday errands. A couple sat in the waiting area, engrossed in their phones. A teller at the far end was meticulously balancing a cash drawer, the rhythmic click of numbers a stark counterpoint to Sarah's racing thoughts. The air, though freshly conditioned, felt thick with unspoken possibilities. Sarah adjusted her bag on her shoulder, the weight of her hidden identity a subtle pressure. She approached the counter, stepping up to an available station. A young teller, mid-20s, pale complexion, dark hair, pulled into a stiff ponytail, glanced up at her. There was no greeting, no smile, just a quick, almost dismissive once-over before the teller shifted her attention back to the screen in front of her. No warmth, no standard customer service pleasantry, just a blank, almost bored expression. Sarah cleared her throat a little louder than intended, breaking the silence. "Hi," she said, her voice steady. "I'd like to make a withdrawal." The teller didn't look up, merely reaching for a clipboard and sliding it across the counter. "Fill this out." The form was standard: name, account number, withdrawal amount, nothing unusual. Sarah pulled a pen from her bag and meticulously filled in the details. $4,000, 0 cents. Not a huge sum, but enough to require an ID verification. She slid the clipboard back. That was when the shift happened. The teller's eyes flicked over the form, then to Sarah's ID. Her brows pulled together, lips pressing into a thin line. Something about the moment felt different. A slight tension in the air, a hesitation that hadn't been there seconds ago. Sarah waited, giving her the benefit of the doubt. The teller glanced up again, this time actually looking at Sarah's face. Then she hesitated, a beat too long, a moment of doubt, of silent assessment. And in that split second, Sarah knew. It wasn't about the withdrawal. It wasn't about a banking policy. It wasn't about security. It was about who they thought she was. The teller's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, as if coming to a decision, she slowly placed Sarah's ID back on the counter. Instead of proceeding with the transaction, she uttered a phrase that sealed Sarah's suspicion, a phrase that would echo in her mind long after. I'll be right back." Sarah's eyes narrowed as the teller grabbed the ID and walked away, disappearing through a door leading to the manager's office. She exhaled slowly, tapping her nails against the marble countertop. She had expected to be treated differently. She hadn't expected this. But something told her it was only the beginning. Sarah wasn't leaving, not until she got answers. This quiet, seemingly innocuous interaction was about to unravel a much larger truth that would expose the very cracks in the foundation she had worked so hard to build. The young teller's hasty retreat felt like a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Sarah watched her disappear behind the frosted glass door, a faint click confirming its closure. The low hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly seemed louder, the distant chatter of other customers muted. A few tense seconds stretched into a full minute, then two. Sarah remained outwardly composed, but a quiet fury began to simmer beneath her calm exterior. This wasn't just poor customer service. It was a deliberate act, a judgment made based on what? Her simple clothes, her unassuming demeanor. Finally, the door opened again. The young teller reemerged, her face now a carefully blank canvas, her eyes darting away from Sarah's. Trailing behind her was a man in his late 40s, stocky build, with thinning dark hair slicked back and a pair of rimless glasses perched on his nose. This was Mr. Harrison, the branch manager. Sarah recognized him instantly from the branch's opening ceremony, though he clearly didn't recognize her. His smile was polite but too controlled, a thin veneer over an underlying sternness. He wasn't approaching with the ease of someone genuinely wanting to help. He was assessing, categorizing, judging. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Mr. Harrison began, his voice smooth, almost condescending. "My teller tells me there's an issue with your withdrawal." He didn't wait for Sarah to explain. He picked up her ID from the counter, scrutinizing it with an intensity that felt less like a security check and more like a personal interrogation. His eyes lingered on her photo, then flicked back to her casual attire. "Is this your first time banking with us, Miss Jenkins?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "No, it is not." "And what exactly do you do for work, Miss Jenkins?" he pressed, his tone subtly implying doubt, as if her appearance didn't quite align with the privilege of having a substantial account. Sarah decided to play along, keeping her voice even. "I work in finance." Mr. Harrison's lips thinned. "And is this a personal account or—" Sarah let out a short, humorous laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. There it was, the moment where professionalism slipped just enough for the truth to show. They weren't seeing a valued customer. They were seeing someone they needed to manage. This was the quiet prejudice, the subtle bias that the whispers had warned her about. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice measured, "I simply wish to withdraw funds from my account. I have provided my ID. What seems to be the problem?" He placed her ID back on the counter with a definitive tap. "Well, Miss Jenkins, we simply can't verify this transaction right now. For security precautions, we'll need to ask for some additional security steps." "Additional security steps?" Sarah repeated, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "Such as, can you tell me the exact amount of your last deposit?" he asked, a triumphant gleam in his eye, as if catching her in a trap. Sarah blinked. That wasn't standard procedure. While security questions were normal, asking for the exact amount of the last deposit, particularly for a simple withdrawal that had already been verified by ID, was highly unusual and unnecessary. It was designed to trip her up, to create an excuse. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice now dangerously calm, "I have presented a valid government-issued ID. I have filled out the withdrawal slip accurately. If I were a man in a tailored suit right now, would you be asking me these questions? Or," she leaned in slightly, "if I wasn't dressed quite so casually." A flicker of discomfort crossed Mr. Harrison's face, quickly masked by a forced official smile. "This isn't about appearance, Ms. Jenkins," he said smoothly, a touch too quickly. "It's about policy. We must ensure the security of our clients' funds." "And by denying me access to my funds, you're doing what exactly?" Sarah challenged, her gaze unwavering. "Protecting me from myself." "I'm afraid I could not process this transaction at this time," he stated, his voice now firm, dismissive. He gestured dismissively towards her ID. "You can try again another day when you have the required information, or perhaps visit another branch." Sarah's heart pounded, but her resolve was iron. She had suspected, but now she knew. This wasn't just an isolated incident of rudeness. This was a systemic issue, a discriminatory practice, thinly veiled as policy. And the worst part, she knew, deep in her gut, that many other people had walked away from this very counter, defeated, shamed, and unheard, because they didn't have the power to push back. But Sarah Jenkins did, and she wasn't leaving. The walls of unfairness had closed in around her, but she wasn't about to let them trap anyone else. The fight was just beginning, and Mr. Harrison had no idea who he was truly dealing with. "I'm afraid I cannot process this transaction at this time," Mr. Harrison stated, his voice now imbued with a tone of finality, dismissive and sharp. He gestured vaguely at Sarah's ID, then at the withdrawal slip. "You can try again another day when you have the required information, or perhaps visit another branch." He even offered a brittle, almost triumphant half-smile. He truly believed he had won, that he had effectively dismissed an inconvenient, casually dressed woman. But Sarah wasn't just a casually dressed woman. She was the architect of the very institution he now served, and his arrogant dismissal ignited a spark of righteous anger within her. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about every person who had walked into this bank, or any bank, and been made to feel small, unworthy, or less than because of how they looked, how they spoke, or where they came from. "Mr. Harrison," Sarah said, her voice remaining eerily calm, a dangerous quiet before the storm, "I believe I have provided all the required information. My valid ID is right here. My account number is accurate, and the funds are present." She gestured to her ID on the counter. "So, let's be clear. You are refusing to process my withdrawal based on what exactly?" His smile vanished, replaced by a slight flush of annoyance. "I've explained, Ms. Jenkins, security protocols." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Security protocols that mysteriously apply only to me, while I've watched other customers make transactions without a single extra question?" Then Mr. Harrison made a truly unthinkable error. His polite veneer finally cracked. With a barely suppressed sigh of exasperation, he reached beneath the counter. A discreet click echoed in the suddenly silent lobby. Within seconds, a uniformed security guard, broad-shouldered and unsmiling, emerged from a back office. His hand rested near his belt, his eyes sweeping the room, then settling on Sarah. His expression was unreadable, but the message was clear: compliance. Sarah's breath hitched, not in fear, but in profound disbelief and a surge of incandescent fury. He had called security for a simple withdrawal, for daring to question his discriminatory treatment, the audacity, the sheer arrogance. This wasn't just a policy violation. This was a power play designed to intimidate and silence. And it was happening in her bank. Her hand instinctively went to her crossbody bag. She pulled out her phone, not discreetly but deliberately, the screen glowing in the muted bank light. The guard took a step forward. "Miss Jenkins?" Mr. Harrison's voice sharpened, now laced with a thinly veiled threat. "I advise you to reconsider your actions." Sarah ignored him. Her thumb hovered over the record button. "Oh, I'm not doing anything wrong, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, almost serene. "I just want to make sure I get this on record, for the sake of transparency, of course." She pressed record. "So, for the camera, Mr. Harrison, please state why you are refusing to allow me access to my own account despite providing government-issued identification, and why you have now called security on a paying customer." Mr. Harrison's face stiffened. He darted a nervous glance at the few remaining customers who were now openly staring. He mumbled something about disrupting bank operations, and then he made one final catastrophic mistake. In a fit of pique, driven by a desperate need to assert control over the escalating situation, he reached out, not to grab her, not to push her phone away, but to snatch her ID off the counter. As if despite everything, he still needed to have the last move, to physically take something from her. But that was it. That was the moment Sarah smiled, a slow, cold, utterly terrifying smile, the kind of smile that sends chills down your spine. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice cutting through the sudden thick silence of the lobby, "let me introduce myself properly." Her hand moved with a swift, almost predatory grace. She plucked her ID from his bewildered grip, flipping it over in her hand, tapping her finger against the name printed on it. Her gaze was locked onto his, unwavering. "You see, this isn't just any customer's ID." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing the unbearable tension to build to a crescendo. The teller's eyes widened, the security guard shifted uneasily. Mr. Harrison looked like a deer caught in headlights, his face draining of all color. "You're looking," Sarah stated, her voice dropping to a low, powerful register that commanded absolute attention, "at the founder and CEO of Sterling Savings." The impact was immediate. A collective gasp rippled through the small lobby. The young teller's hand flew to her mouth. The security guard froze, his eyes darting between Sarah and the now ghastly pale Mr. Harrison, who seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. The man who had just minutes ago dismissed her, interrogated her, and called security on her, now stood before her, utterly speechless, his jaw slack, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. The twist was complete, and the silent betrayal had just found its voice. The silence in the Grand View branch was deafening. Mr. Harrison stood frozen, a statue of stunned disbelief, his face a mottled canvas of red and white. The young teller's hand remained clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. Even the security guard, who had moments ago exuded quiet authority, now seemed to shrink, his broad shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly. Sarah Jenkins, the woman they had so casually dismissed, now stood before them, not as an angry customer, but as the very embodiment of the institution they had just betrayed. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her tone chillingly calm, "I built this bank from nothing. I personally signed the approval for this branch. I approved the hiring budget that got you this job." Her eyes bored into his, unwavering. "And today I walked in as just another customer, simply to see if our principles were being upheld. You know what happened, Mr. Harrison? I was refused service, lied to, humiliated, and treated like I didn't belong in my own bank." He finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Mrs. Jenkins, I assure you, I don't assure me," she cut him off, her voice cool, clear, and utterly decisive. "Show me." His mouth snapped shut, the words dying on his lips. Sarah glanced at her phone. The recording light was still a steady red. She stopped it, slipping the device back into her bag with a click that echoed loudly in the silent lobby. "Corporate will be in touch," she stated, her gaze unwavering. Then, she added, a chilling finality in her tone, "and Mr. Harrison, you might want to start looking for a new job." She didn't wait for a response. With a quiet dignity that belied the storm raging within, she turned and walked out the door, leaving behind a scene of absolute chaos and shattered composure. The fallout was immediate, and it was brutal. By the next morning, Sarah had already scheduled an emergency meeting with her corporate leadership team. No expenses were spared. Every single branch manager was called in from every corner of the country. The air in the boardroom crackled with tension as Sarah, no longer in disguise, presented the unvarnished truth, complete with the video recording from her phone. Every customer service policy, every anti-discrimination guideline was not just reviewed but dissected. And Mr. Harrison? He was gone, swiftly and unequivocally. His dismissal sent a clear, undeniable message throughout Sterling Savings. The core values were not negotiable. But Sarah didn't stop there. This wasn't just about punishing one bad apple. It was about pruning a diseased branch to save the whole tree. She spearheaded a comprehensive overhaul, implementing mandatory, immersive bias training across all branches designed to challenge subconscious prejudices and foster genuine empathy. She introduced a new, robust accountability system, empowering customers and employees alike to report any instances of discrimination, no matter how subtle, with guaranteed anonymity and swift investigation. She understood that true systemic change meant creating a culture where such injustices couldn't take root. Within weeks, Sterling Savings began to see a profound shift. Employees, now truly aware and empowered, were more attentive, more empathetic. Customers, especially those who had been historically ignored, brushed off, or made to feel uncomfortable, began to notice the difference. They felt seen, heard, and genuinely valued. It was a slow, steady tide of positive change, driven by the ripple effect of one courageous act. Sarah herself received heartfelt apologies from senior executives who hadn't realized the extent of the cultural drift, and she appreciated their humility and commitment to real change. And Sarah, she never forgot that day in the Grandview branch because it was proof of something she had always known, a truth that resonated deeply with her own journey of building from nothing. Real change doesn't happen because of words on a page. It happens because someone, often someone overlooked, refuses to accept the way things are. It happens when someone dares to challenge the status quo, even when the odds feel stacked against them. And on that ordinary Tuesday, that someone was her. This story isn't just about a bank. It's about the everyday injustices many of us face, the subtle biases that chip away at our dignity. Think of it like this. How many times have you or someone you know been dismissed in a store, ignored at a counter, or judged based on a snap first impression? How many opportunities are lost? How many dreams are deferred because someone in a position of power decides you don't fit the mold? Sarah Jenkins had the power to overturn an injustice, but what about the millions who don't? This narrative, Sarah's story, is a powerful reminder that every voice matters, that every instance of bias, no matter how small, erodes the trust that society is built upon. If you've ever felt unheard, unseen, or unfairly judged, if you've felt that sting of being discriminated against, remember Sarah's story. Remember her calm resolve in the face of blatant disrespect. Your voice matters. Don't stay silent. Speak up. Call it out. Demand the respect and fairness you deserve. Because the only way things truly get better is when we collectively refuse to accept anything less than the dignity and equity we all deserve. Your turn to create change starts now.